So normally I do my news of the week episode on a Wednesday, but this week I'm doing it on a Thursday because yesterday I was relatively busy, and hence that's why I decided to push back this week's news of the week episode on a Thursday. But either way, the first news we're going to talk about is that Elvis Powell is reported to return to MLS and is actually training with the Philadelphia Union. Now, if the Union are going to sign Elvis Powell outright, most likely that is just a move for them to improve their depth pieces in terms of the fullback position. And I believe Elvis Powell is probably going to be like a third or fourth string fullback for this Union team. But either way, it's good to see that Elvis Powell is coming back to MLS. And even though a lot of people feel like maybe he is kind of is in his twilight of his career, since it feels like he's been in the league for a very long time right now. He's only 26 years old, and I remember a couple of years ago where he was regarded as one of the best fullback in the league with the Portland Timbers, and his career kind of started to went downhill when he joined FC Cincinnati and even spending a short stint with Inter Miami before going to the Middle East, and now he is going to be coming back to MLS. And again, I'm pretty sure he's probably not going to be like a regular starter, and he's probably going to be deep into the depth chart. But if he does have an opportunity to play for the Union this season, I'm pretty sure he's going to take advantage of that, because again, this was a guy that has been regarded a couple of years ago as a very high potential kind of fullback in his early years, and this is also kind of a classic example of what happened when a player has so much potential in early his career and it just did not work out, and kind of considered a bust a couple of years later. Now, Besiktas is reported to set to sign Toronto FC fullback Richarlia, and this is according to Hutchinson that actually reported this, and I won't be surprised Richarlia is going to be going to Besiktas during this summer, because there's been a lot of rumors that of course is going to be the case. And Richarlia, believe it or not, he's actually the same age as Elvis Powell, and this is despite the fact that Richarlia, people feel like he's only in his early 20s because he hasn't been in the league for a long time. Well, he's kind of been a little bit of a late bloomer, and it's also, as I mentioned, since he's 26 years old, it's also right around that age where it's kind of now or never in terms of if you want to make the jump to Europe. And I'm pretty sure if Richarlia does have some aspiration to play in Europe, this is definitely a move that he wants to do, and we'll see whether or not if TFC is going to do so, and if they are going to do so, let's see how much they're going to actually able to receive in terms of the sum of money that they sold Richarlia to Besiktas. Now, the New England Revolution have signed Carlos Gil to a contract extension till 2024, and this one is a no-brainer. I mean, Carlos Gil has already emerged as an early candidate for MVP this season, and he's been widely regarded as one of the best number 10 in this league for the past couple of years. And I will admit, alongside with a lot of people, will admit that they were clearly wrong in terms of the quality that Carlos Gil can bring, not only to the New England Revolution, but here in MLS. Like, I remember when he first went to the Revs, I, alongside with many people, was kind of skeptical that he was going to do anything, because he didn't really do well in Europe. And we've seen before where players that doesn't get out of Europe, and when they come to MLS, not all players, of course, are able to blossom. Although that being said, it could also be the opposite, where we have seen some players that doesn't make it get in Europe, but when they come to MLS, they immediately blossom. And this seems like it's just a case for Carlos Gil, who, again, he is no doubt the most important player to that New England Revolution side. And knowing the fact that he's also getting to almost to his 30s right now, I'm assuming he's probably not going to be going back to Europe. So this is not the case that New England want to lock him up, so that they make sure if there is a team in Europe interest in Carlos Gil, they can of course get a sum of money out of that. But it's also because they want to make sure that they can of course keep him. And again, he is definitely going to be an incredible player for this Revs side. That if he also can of course stay healthy, because I know last year he had that problem with the torn ACL. But if he can of course stay healthy for this team, he is definitely going to be that number 10 player that New England has been definitely looking forward to. And I think the Revs are going to be a really decent team with Carlos Gil for these next couple of years. Now, moving on in terms of the next news, and now talk about injuries. Unfortunately, it is official that Andy Polo is indeed going to be done for the season and it seems like it's going to be a torn meniscus and a ruptured quadricep that he, of course, suffered. That is the reason why he's done for the season. He also had surgery on that a couple of days ago, and I definitely wish Andy Polo a speedy recovery, because again, that horror tackle in that game that he suffered against the Galaxy, where Derek Williams basically put a leg breaker challenge on Andy Polo, is kind of the reason why he, of course, have suffered this injury. Now, speaking of Derek Williams, so far I haven't heard any news from Disco in terms of how many additional game suspension he's going to receive. I'm assuming maybe later on this week or even next week we're going to definitely hear some news that he might be receiving more than just a 1-game suspension that he currently have with that red card. Now, during this spell, he also have received some racial abuse and some death threats on his Instagram page, and this is mostly because of that horror tackle that he put on Andy Polo. Now, apparently from what I heard is that these kind of racial abuse and death threats aren't really from Galaxy fans or from Timbers fans, or actually most specifically the Timbers fans, but it's more from the Peru national team fans that, certainly they were very upset at Derek Williams taking out one of their bright young talent that is Andy Polo. But that being said, this is absolutely unacceptable. Seeing what Derek Williams has done, and again, I know it was a horror challenge, and he definitely after he made that challenge, you can clearly see that he definitely started to show some remorse, and he knew that he, of course, screwed up during that instant. But to just kind of just use that as a way to basically use a way to basically racially abuse or even provide some death threats on him, that is absolutely not right whatsoever. And I really hope that eventually they'll probably crack down in terms of who, of course, posted that, because again, I know there are certain fan base that is very passionate to the game, and I know certainly in the Peru national team fan base, they are definitely very passionate about their team. But there's one thing to be passionate about your team, but there's another to cross the line, as what they seems to do here with those racial abuse and death threats, because this is something that not only MLS is trying to cut down and trying to solve the issue, but in terms of world football alone, that is something that is still an issue to today, and they've been trying their best to kind of cut this out. And anytime when you see this, it's definitely a very unfortunate situation. So, well, I do think Derek Williams is going to get a couple of games of suspension. I do want to kind of show some regrets that, I don't think he deserved all this racial abuse and death threats for just a simple mistake that he made in that last game against the LA Galaxy. Now, speaking of the Peruvian national team, another player from the Peruvian national team is also going to be out for a bit, is Edison Flores, as he looks like he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks at a minimum with a hamstring injury that he suffered in the opening minute in that game against the Union. And yeah, this is definitely going to be disappointing not only for Peru but also for DC United, because again, this has been an issue for Edison Flores ever since he came to DC United, where last year when he came to this team he had a very injury-riddled season, and this year with him finally getting healthy, DC was hoping maybe he could start to be that number 10 that they paid that big sum of money from last off-season, and now he's back in the IR list again. So yeah, I'm going to say what I said before, where if Edison Flores has continued to spend more times in the IR list, I won't be surprised if DC is going to do something about this, where you can't just keep having like an injury-riddled player, where you probably might think he would eventually develop to be the number 10 that you hope that you of course would get when you pay that huge sum of money. But at the end of the day, if he's not going to be available for most of the games, there would be a case where they have to make some decision of whether or not if they're going to be thinking about keeping Edison Flores or not. But now moving on, in terms of now kind of talk about a little bit happier news, because anytime when we talk about injury news in the news of the week, it is kind of a little bit grim. But on a more brighter note, Austin FC have announced that their home opener at Q2 Stadium will indeed be at full capacity. And we all have also heard that there are a couple of teams that have started to go full capacity during next month. I know the Quakes, of course, are going to do full capacity in that game against the Galaxy in the Cali Clasico, and I believe California, knowing the fact that they've said that on June 15, they're pretty much just going to disregard any kind of restriction, or in other words, pretty much lift all their restriction in terms of this pandemic over. I think we're going to start to see full capacity crowd in all the stadium that is currently in California, and of course we have already seen some full capacity crowd in some MLS stadium right now. We've seen Atlanta basically a couple of weeks ago had the biggest crowd ever for a soccer event ever since the pandemic started back in March. And then we also saw 22,000 strong packed into Nissan Stadium in that game between Nashville SC and Austin and FC. So we're slowly starting to get back to normal, and we're slowly starting to see teams, of course, are going to full capacity. But obviously this, I think, means a lot to Austin FC because, you know, heading into this season, there was definitely doubts of whether or not indeed Austin FC is going to open their brand new stadium and playing their first ever home game in front of a full capacity crowd, and it seems like that, of course, is going to be the case right now. Now, moving on in terms of the next news is that I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that situation in that game between NYCFC versus TFC, where, you know how I mentioned a little bit during the review in that game between Nashville and Austin FC, where I do admit I was wrong in terms of talking about that goal that was disallowed for NYCFC, and it was Medina, the one that, of course, scored that disallowed goal, and that I talk about how, according to this rule, that is the reason why this goal, of course, was disallowed. Well, now that I actually did look at the rule a little bit more, and apparently Pro definitely look at the rule, the actual rule a little bit more, where, you know, there's this rule specifically, you cannot intentionally block a goalkeeper or goal kick during that part. But it seems like the rule only says that, you know, if you decide to block a shot from the goalkeeper that is basically taking a goal kick, as long as you actually give the goalkeeper space in terms of taking the goal kick, and as long as if the goalkeeper basically is able to distribute the ball and the ball is basically out of his hand, and then you of course block the shot intentionally, then that is completely legal. And it seems like that, of course, was the case in that situation where God, who was it? Oh, Bono was the one that basically they decided to kick the ball up the field, and you can clearly see that he definitely they distribute that ball up the field before Medina actually blocked that shot. And also Medina wasn't in front of Bono when that, of course, happened. He was actually about 3 yards away from Bono when that goal kick, of course, was taken. And we also kind of saw something similar to this in that game between Nashville and Austin FC, where, you know, we saw CJ Sapon almost block a goal kick from Brad Stuvern. And we also saw something that is an identical thing that happened in that game between the Rapids and Houston, where Diego Rubio actually blocked a goal kick from Marco Maric, and that goal, of course, was stand. And I'm pretty sure NYCFC fans were very triggered when they saw that and thinking, that's kind of the exact same play, so why is that count as a goal, and why is the game that has the exact same play in our game did not count as a goal? And in the end, that of course, when you look at the rules, that exactly is the case, where, yeah, both of those goals clearly should have counted, and it's not just one of those that counted, and one of them, of course, does not count it. And also, I wrote here on the board basically saying Pro explain and admit that the goal that they call back on NYCFC in the game between NYCFC versus Toronto FC was indeed the wrong call. And, you know, I know at the end of the day, NYCFC fans are still going to be upset about that, and they feel like they got robbed in terms of that game. But I'm also going to go back to what I said in that review, where yes, they did kind of got robbed with a call that was called wrong during that sequence. But even so, you just simply cannot have a lapse of concentration as those NYCFC players had, where you can't just let that blown call that kind of get into your mind and then just forget how to defend after that. Because, you know, as a professional athlete, I know it's tough that you have a call that goes against you. In fact, a lot of teams have gone through that spell where where you have a call that goes against you, and you definitely are not happy about it. But I'm also pretty sure that there's a lot of teams that has those moments on those players, probably does not just think about that the whole time and just kind of get what they're supposed to do, and just immediately get score on the other end. So yeah, NYCFC was wrong, definitely raw kind of robbed in that game, but also at the same time they shouldn't have conceded that goal just because of a wrong call, and that the composure and the mentality of those NYCFC players clearly should have been better during that incident. But now moving on, in terms of the next news, is that the U.S. men's national team has announced the 23-man roster for the CONCACAF Nation League's final, and I actually have it here on my phone right now. I didn't really want to write it out because it's going to pretty much take up the whole board, but the 23-man roster for the Nations League finals is also kind of similar to the ones that they basically put for the friendly against Switzerland. So at goal, they have free goalkeeper, that is Ethan Horvath, David Ochoa, and Zach Steffen. Defender, you got John Brooks, Reggie Canyons, Sergino Des, Mark McKenzie, Matt Miazga, Tim Raines, and Anthony Robinson, and DeAndre Yetland. Midfield, you got Kellen Acosta, Tyler Adams, Sebastian Lletget, Weston McKennie, Jonas Musa, and Jackson Yu. And then going forward, you got Brendan Aronson, Christian Pulisic, Gio Reyna, Josh Sargent, Jordan Sibetchu, I think that's how you say it, and Tim Wade going forward for them. So when I look at this lineup that Gregg Berhalter basically named, I think this is pretty much the strongest roster that the U.S. currently has. And I think, when you look at these Nation League finals that's going to be happening, I believe, next week, these games are going to be a really big telling story for this U.S. men's national team, because I'm pretty sure this is the roster that Gregg Berhalter is going to name is probably going to be the roster that is going to happen in the World Cup qualifying, and it's definitely a very telling story that if the U.S. does do well in the Nations League finals, then there's definitely going to be some optimism that maybe indeed we're not going to repeat what we did in 2017. But if we do have problem in the Nation League's final, then I think U.S. men's national team fans will start to question Gregg Berhalter and just question the fact that has this team indeed, of course, made a progress. I mean, I know U.S. men's national team fans have always been very critical in terms of their team and also in terms of Gregg Berhalter, but as I said before, even though I know at times this team has not done well, and especially, we talk about the disappointment in that Olympic qualifier where they, of course, failed to make it to the Olympics once again. I think overall, for me, I would, if I had to choose whether or not, if we, of course, would make it to the Olympics, and that should I choose that rather than, of course, potentially making the World Cup, I would absolutely choose making the World Cup rather than making to the Olympics. I mean, making the Olympics is definitely a big deal too, because we've seen in the past the U.S. have not been able to do so, and it would have been very special with the way that this team, since how it has shown how young this team is, maybe finally we get to that step where we can, of course, make it to the Olympics. But at the end of the day, the whole reason why the U.S. men's national team has been just in such a mess to begin with, and also just a lot of pressure coming into this World Cup qualifying, probably even more than we ever seen in these last 20 years, is because previous year this team, of course, failed to make it to the World Cup, and that should not be a thing with this team, and especially with the country that we're living in right now. I mean, I know the U.S. is not a country that sees soccer as number one sports, but still, it was definitely a huge embarrassment of what we saw in 2017, and the fact that this team did not make it to the World Cup that year. And hopefully this year is definitely not going to be a repeat case, and a way to make sure that it's not a repeat case is to get off to a good start in terms of not only in the World Cup qualifying, but also in this Nation League final, where we're going to see majority of the player that is probably going to be on that World Cup qualifying squad able to perform well. So we shall see in this next week to see if that, of course, is going to be the case. But now moving on, in terms of the last two news of this news of the week, is that Lucas Ariam has won the Player of the Week, and he actually also won the award for Goal of the Week this week for his second goal that he, of course, scored, which was a wonderful free kick against NYCFC that not only scored the second goal, but was also the game winner for NYCFC. So yeah, no doubt that of course is deserved for the Goal of the Week, and also deserved this week's Player of the Week. But finally, the last news we're going to talk about is none other than the most controversial news of the week, and that of course is the power ranking. And you know, for these past couple of weeks, I clearly feel like these so-called MLS experts have admit that yeah, they're getting a lot of heat in terms of these power rankings. And even the guy that actually released the article for the power rankings every single week, that is Sam Jones, he even said that, you know, if you going to blame me for the reason why these power rankings are awful, then yeah, you're basically blaming the wrong guy, because I'm not really the one that of course create these power rankings. And in some way he is correct. He's actually not the main guy that is the mastermind in terms of these terrible power rankings. But at the same time, he is kind of part of the problem, because he's one of those so-called MLS experts that basically vote to see where they put each team in the power rankings. And yeah, you know, I just feel like at this point, you know, as bad as the power rankings has been, and I'm not sure I've said this before, but I feel like the reason why the power rankings are just so bad is because these so-called MLS expert wants to kind of trigger a lot of people, and they feel like maybe triggering a lot of people in the these power rankings is a way to of course get the ratings and the clicks in terms of that. And in some way it's not a bad strategy. I mean, I know some people will feel like that of course is wrong, but hey, you know, if there's any way to give people's attention, even though it's kind of in a negative way, then they of course would do that. And again, it just gets to a point where I feel like they're doing this on purpose, just to kind of trigger some people about where exactly your team is in the power rankings. And the fact that again, this week I definitely see a couple of teams that I feel like they were definitely too high or even too low in the power rankings. But at least in the top 10 this week, we didn't really have a lot of crazy moves. The first, second, and third place team in the power rankings is actually exactly the same as last week, with the Seattle Sounders being at top, followed by the New England Revolution and the Philadelphia Union. Then you got Orlando City moving up one spot from last week, and then you got Sporting KC moving up 3 spot. The Timbers also moving up 1 spot before we got NYCFC moving down 1 spot. LAFC, of course, moving up 1 spot. And then the Galaxy, of course, they were the biggest down mover in the top 10, losing 5 spots from last week. And then, of course, you got Nashville SC, who was the biggest up mover in terms of the top 10, and actually make their first appearance in the top 10, moving up 4 spots from that win against Austin FC. So, yeah, you know, again, I'm not really going to explain any further in terms of what my feelings is in terms of the top 10. I'll let you guys in the comments section debate whether or not, if this is exactly the top 10 you would actually think is the case in terms of this week's power rankings. But either way, hope you guys enjoy this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of all of these news. And as always, if there's any news that I didn't mention here on the board and you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments below. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time.